The massive bioship hung in space like a living nightmare. Its dark surface pulsed with veins of green light, and strange growths covered its hull like tumors. The ship was 15 kilometers long and looked more like a sea creature than anything built by intelligent beings. This was the World Render, flagship of the Zephyrian hegemony, and it cast its shadow over the mining world below. On the planet's surface, the Keth people gathered in their largest city. They were small, furry beings with 6 arms and large eyes that showed their fear. Their leader, Elder Mothra, stood before the massive viewing screen that showed the bioship above. His hands shook as he waited for the transmission from their overlords. The screen flickered and the face of Overlord Commander Zixara appeared. She was tall and pale, with skin that seemed to glow with its own light. Her eyes were completely black, and when she smiled, her teeth were sharp like a predator's. She wore robes that seemed to move on their own, as if they were alive. "Greetings, little Keth," Zixara said, her voice cold and mocking. "It is time for your tribute assessment." Elder Mothra bowed deeply. "Great Overlord, we have prepared the usual amount. 3 million tons of rare metals as agreed in the Treaty of Submission." Zixara's laugh was like breaking glass. "The usual amount? Oh, little creature, you misunderstand. The hegemony's needs have grown. Your quota is now 6 million tons. The Elder's fur stood on end with shock. "But Great Overlord, that is impossible. We would have to work our people to death to mine that much." "Then work them to death," Zixara replied without emotion. "The hegemony does not concern itself with the survival of lesser species. You exist to serve, nothing more." Behind the Elder, other Keth leaders whispered in fear. They had heard what happened to worlds that refused the hegemony's demands. The bioships would release their terrible weapons, turning entire planets into dead rocks floating in space. "You have 1 standard cycle to meet the new quota," Zixara continued. "Fail, and we will demonstrate why the hegemony has ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years. The transmission ended, leaving the Keth in terrified silence. They had no choice. They never had a choice. No one did when facing the might of the Zephyrian hegemony. Far above, on the bridge of the World Render, Zixara turned to her second-in-command. "Increase patrols in this sector. Fear must be maintained." "Yes, Commander," the officer replied. "The other subject races are meeting their quotas without complaint." "Good. Supreme Architect Velthar expects continued expansion. We have 17 new species to subjugate this cycle alone." Meanwhile, in the depths of space between the spiral arms of the galaxy, something moved through the darkness. It was made of metal and ceramics, not the living tissue that the hegemony used for their ships. Strange energy readings pulsed from its hull, patterns that no hegemony database could identify. On a distant monitoring station, Intelligence Officer Nethris stared at the readings on her screen. The energy signature was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was crude, primitive even, but the power levels were enormous. How could such backward technology generate so much energy? Probably just a sensor error, she muttered to herself, but filed the report anyway. Strange readings had been appearing more often lately, always from the same region of space. Something was out there, moving toward hegemony territory. On the capital world of Zephyr Prime, Supreme Architect Velthar stood in his throne room. The chamber was carved from a single massive crystal that had once been a living creature. The walls showed images from across the hegemony's vast empire. Thousands of worlds, billions of slaves, all working to feed the machine of conquest. Velthar himself was ancient, even by hegemony standards. His body was more machine than flesh now, kept alive by technology that lesser species could not understand. His eyes glowed with the same green light as his bioships, and his voice echoed with the authority of 3 millennia of rule. A messenger approached, crawling on his belly across the crystal floor. "Great Architect, the tribute reports from Sector 7 are complete." "Speak," Velthar commanded. "All quotas exceeded by 12%. The Keth have been motivated to increase production. The Velnari crystal farms are producing at maximum capacity. The Myrthanis ocean worlds continue to provide biomaterial for the fleet. Velthar nodded slowly. The natural order continues. The strong rule. The weak serve. It has always been this way. Yes, Great Architect. Our bioships patrol every system. Our technology remains superior to all others. Nothing challenges the hegemony. But even as the messenger spoke these words, the strange energy signature continued to move through space, getting closer to hegemony territory with each passing day. In a forgotten corner of the galaxy, on a world that had been strip-mined centuries ago, an old Keth mining engineer named Toltha looked up at the stars. His people had once been free, had once traveled between worlds as explorers and traders. That was before the hegemony came. He remembered the stories his grandfather told, of the time before the overlords, when species worked together instead of in fear, when the strong protected the weak instead of enslaving them. But those were just stories now. The hegemony had ruled for so long that most beings could not imagine any other way of life. One day, Toltha whispered to the empty sky, someone will come who is not afraid of them, someone who will make them pay for what they have done. It was just an old being's wishful thinking. Everyone knew that nothing could challenge the hegemony. Their bioships were too powerful, their technology too advanced, their empire too vast. They had crushed every rebellion, destroyed every threat, conquered every enemy. But deep in space, the unknown vessel continued its journey. Its hull was scarred from battles fought in distant systems. Its weapons were charged and ready. Its crew was determined and unafraid. The message had been the same wherever they went. We are humanity, and we do not kneel. Back on the world render, Commander Zixara reviewed the reports from across her sector. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The subject species were broken and obedient. The tribute flowed steadily to the capital. The hegemony's power grew stronger each day. She looked out at the stars through the viewing port of her ship. Somewhere out there were more worlds to conquer, more species to enslave, more resources to claim for the greater glory of the hegemony. Commander, her communications officer called out, long-range sensors are detecting something at the edge of our territory. Another refugee ship trying to flee our justice? Zixara asked with amusement. Unknown, Commander. The energy signature is strange, not like anything in our databases. Zixara frowned. In 3,000 years, the hegemony had encountered every type of technology in the galaxy. There should be nothing new under the stars. Dispatch a patrol. Group to investigate, she ordered. If it's another primitive species trying to hide from us, remind them that there is no escape from the hegemony's reach. The patrol ships launched from the world render, their biohulls glowing as they accelerated toward the unknown contact. They expected to find another cowering species, ready to submit to the hegemony's will. They had no idea that they were about to encounter something that would shake the very foundations of their empire. Something that had traveled from another galaxy entirely, carrying weapons and technology that the hegemony had never seen before. The age of unchallenged rule was about to end, though none of them knew it yet. The space around the edge of hegemony territory rippled like water. Reality twisted and folded as something massive pushed through the barrier between dimensions. With a flash of blue light that could be seen from 3 star systems away, the human Dreadnought UES Indomitable dropped out of quantum fold space. The ship was a monster of metal and ceramics, 15 kilometers of angular plates and weapon batteries. Unlike the smooth organic curves of hegemony bioships, the Indomitable looked like what it was, a weapon built by a species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of war. Every line of its hull spoke of function over form, of deadly purpose, wrapped in armor thick enough to stop a small moon. On the bridge, Captain Sarah Chen stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the tactical displays. She was a small woman with graying hair and calm brown eyes, but her crew of 8,000 would follow her into the mouth of hell without question. She had earned that loyalty in the battles that freed humanity from the machines that once tried to wipe them out. Navigation report, she said in her quiet voice. We've entered the target galaxy, Captain. Lieutenant Morrison replied from his station. Long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures throughout this region. Looks like we found what we were looking for. Chen nodded. The journey from the Milky Way had taken 2 years, even using humanity's most advanced fold-drive technology. They had come here following signals detected by deep space telescopes, signs of an advanced civilization that spanned multiple star systems. Earth's leaders had sent the Indomitable to make first contact and assess whether this species posed a threat to humanity's expansion into the universe. Any response to our arrival? Chen asked. Not yet, Captain, but we're detecting movement from several sources, multiple contacts approaching our position. Chen smiled slightly. In her experience, there were 2 ways first contact usually went. Either the aliens were friendly and wanted to talk, or they were hostile and wanted to fight. She had prepared for both possibilities. Communications. Open a channel on all frequencies. Let's introduce ourselves properly. The communications officer, a young woman named Martinez, nodded and activated the ship's transmission array. Channel open, Captain. Chen stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never backed down from a fight. Attention unknown vessels. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth ship Indomitable, representing the United Nations of Earth and her colonies. We come in peace seeking diplomatic contact with your civilization. Please respond. The response came 20 minutes later, broadcast on a frequency that made the ship's receivers crackle with static. The voice was cold, alien, and filled with the kind of arrogance that Chen had learned to recognize in bullies and tyrants. Primitive vessel, you have entered the sovereign territory of the Zephyrian hegemony without permission. I am Patrol Commander Kelthera of the biocruiser Fleshrender. You will power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in your immediate destruction. Chen exchanged glances with her senior officers. Commander Williams, her first officer, shook his head with a grim smile. They had hoped for friendly contact, but it seemed they had found something else entirely. Open a response channel, Chen ordered. Channel open, Captain. Chen's voice remained calm, but those who knew her could hear the edge of steel beneath. The polite words. Commander Kelthara, we appreciate your response. However, the Indomitable is a sovereign vessel of the United Nations of Earth. We will not be boarded without cause, and we will not surrender our weapons to unknown entities. If you wish to speak with us, we suggest a neutral meeting location. The alien's response was immediate and hostile. There is no neutrality in hegemony space. You will submit or you will die. This is your final warning. Through the tactical display, Chen watched as 3 bioships approached their position. They were ugly things, all flowing curves and pulsing organs visible through translucent hulls. Each one was about half the size of the Indomitable, but Chen had learned never to underestimate an enemy based on size alone. Captain Morrison called from his station. The lead vessel is powering up some kind of weapon system. Energy readings are off the charts. Chen nodded calmly. Battle stations, raise shields, charge the main batteries. Alarms began to sound throughout the ship as 8,000 human beings prepared for combat. Captain Chen, Kelthera's voice crackled through the speakers. You will witness the power of hegemony biotechnology. Your primitive metal ship cannot stand against weapons evolved over millennia. The first shot came without further warning. A beam of green energy, hot as a star's core, lashed out from the lead bioship and struck the Indomitable's forward shields. The ship shuddered, but the shields held. Chen felt a moment of satisfaction as she watched the tactical display show minimal damage. Well, she said quietly, I guess the talking is over. Morrison, return fire. Show them what human engineering can do. The Indomitable's main gun was a mass accelerator that could launch a tungsten projectile at 15% of light speed. When it fired, the entire ship vibrated with the release of energy. The projectile crossed the distance between the ships in less than 2 seconds. Commander Kelthara had just enough time to realize that the human ship was shooting back before his biocruiser exploded. The tungsten rod, moving at nearly 50,000 kilometers per second, didn't just penetrate his ship's hull. It vaporized everything it touched, turning the Fleshrender into an expanding cloud of superheated gas. The other two bioships immediately began evasive maneuvers, their hulls pulsing with alarm signals. Chen watched them retreat with the same calm expression she had worn throughout the encounter. "Well," Commander Williams said after a moment of silence, "that was educational." "Indeed it was," Chen replied. "Martinez, record a message for transmission to Earth Command. Tell them we've made contact with a hostile alien empire called the Zephyrian Hegemony. Request reinforcements and additional intelligence assets." "Yes, Captain." Chen turned back to the tactical display, where the two surviving bioships were fleeing toward the inner systems. She knew they would carry word of this encounter back to their commanders. Soon, the hegemony would know that something new had entered their territory, something that could fight back. "Captain," Morrison said, "long-range sensors are detecting massive fleet movements throughout this region. Looks like they're mobilizing a response force." Chen nodded. She had expected this. In her experience, bullies always brought friends when their first attempt at intimidation failed. "How long until they reach us?" "At current speeds, approximately 18 hours. "Good. That gives us time to prepare. Williams, I want damage control teams to check every system. Morrison, start plotting jump coordinates for fallback positions. Martinez, prepare a full combat report for transmission to the fleet." As her crew began their preparations, Chen stood at the observation deck looking out at the alien stars. Somewhere in this galaxy, billions of beings lived under the rule of the hegemony. If her brief encounter with Commander Kelthara was any indication, it was a harsh and oppressive rule. She thought of the words carved into the hull of every human warship: "We hold the line." Humanity had faced extinction before, had fought against impossible odds and won. They had defeated the machines that tried to wipe them out, had survived the collapse of their first interstellar government, had rebuilt from the ashes stronger than before. Now they faced a new challenge, an alien empire that seemed to view other species as subjects to be conquered and controlled. Chen had seen enough of history to know how this story usually ended. Either the oppressor was overthrown, or the oppressor destroyed everything that opposed them. She had no intention of letting the second option happen. "Captain," Martinez called out, "incoming transmission from the fleeing vessels. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies." "Let's hear it." The voice that came through the speakers was different from Kelthara's, older and more sophisticated, but no less arrogant. "Unknown vessel, I am Battle Prime Zorthek of the Hegemony War Fleet. You have committed an act of aggression against the sovereign territory of the Hegemony. Surrender immediately, and you will be granted a quick death." Chen smiled, and there was nothing friendly in that expression. "Martinez, open a response channel." "Channel open, Captain." Chen's voice carried across the void between the stars, calm and unafraid. "Battle Prime Zorthak, this is Captain Sarah Chen. Your commander, Kelthara, fired on my ship without provocation. We responded in kind. If you want to discuss terms, we're willing to talk. If you want to fight, we're ready for that too." There was a long pause before Zorthak responded. "You will learn the price of defying the hegemony, human. We have ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years. We have crushed every rebellion, destroyed every threat. You are nothing but another footnote in our history of conquest." "We'll see about that," Chen replied quietly, and cut the transmission. The die was cast. Humanity had entered the galaxy, and the hegemony had chosen war over peace. Chen knew that word of this encounter would spread quickly through both the hegemony fleet and whatever intelligence networks existed among the subject species. For the first time in 3 millennia, someone had stood up to the hegemony and lived to tell about it. War Prime Gorthal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bio-Dreadnought Death's Whisper, and studied the tactical display with growing irritation. The human vessel had retreated into the Kepler Nebula, a region of space filled with electromagnetic interference and dense gas clouds. It was a clever move, he admitted grudgingly. The nebula would mask sensor readings and make targeting difficult. But Gorthal had been fighting wars since before most species in the galaxy had discovered fire. He had personally conquered 47 star systems and destroyed entire civilizations. One primitive metal ship, no matter how lucky its first victory had been, could not stand against the might of Battle Group Omega. "Report," he commanded, his voice echoing through the bridge. Sub-Commander Vexith, a younger hegemony officer with ambitions of his own command, stepped forward. "War Prime, we have 12 bio-dreadnoughts ready for combat. Long-range sensors indicate the human vessel is approximately 50 kilometers inside the nebula, using the interference to mask its exact position." Gorthal nodded slowly. His ships were magnificent creatures, each one grown in the bioforges of Zephyr Prime over decades. Their hulls could regenerate from damage, their weapons could adapt to enemy defenses, and their neural networks could process tactical information faster than any mechanical computer. Against this single human ship, they should have overwhelming superiority. "Form attack formation Vorthak," he ordered. "We will surround the nebula and force the humans into the open. They cannot hide forever." Inside the nebula, Captain Sarah Chen watched her tactical displays with the calm focus of a predator. The hegemony ships were moving exactly as she had hoped they would, spreading out in a classic encirclement pattern. It was a good strategy against most enemies, but humans had learned to fight differently than other species. "Morrison, status report on the drone systems," she said quietly. Lieutenant Morrison's fingers danced over his controls. "Thanatos system is fully operational, Captain. We've deployed 200 combat drones throughout the nebula. They're running, silent, waiting for your command." Chen smiled. The Thanatos system was humanity's answer to numerical superiority. Each drone was a small, fast-moving weapons platform with limited artificial intelligence and a nuclear warhead. Individually, they were not particularly dangerous, but 200 of them, coordinated by the Indomitable's tactical computer, could devastate an enemy fleet. "Weapon status? All systems green, Captain. Main guns charged. Point defense systems active. Antimatter missiles loaded and ready. Electronic warfare? We're broadcasting interference patterns on all hegemony communication frequencies. Should disrupt their coordination when the shooting starts." Chen nodded. Humans had learned the hard way that in space combat, the side that could coordinate their attacks most effectively usually won. If she could break up the hegemony's formation and force them to fight as individuals, the Indomitable had a chance. On the Death's Whisper, War Prime Gorthal was beginning to feel the first stirrings of doubt. His ships were in position around the nebula, but their sensors were having difficulty penetrating the electromagnetic interference. The human vessel could be anywhere in that swirling mass of gas and energy. "War Prime," Sub-Commander Vexith reported, "We're detecting some kind of jamming signal from inside the nebula. It's interfering with our neural networks." Gorthal's eyes narrowed. Jamming was a tactic used by desperate enemies who knew they were outgunned. But it also suggested a level of technical sophistication that he hadn't expected from these humans. "Begin the assault," he ordered. "All ships converge on the nebula center. Use bioplasma charges to burn away the interference." The 12 bio-dreadnoughts began moving forward, their hulls pulsing with gathered energy. Each ship was over 5 kilometers long, bristling with organic weapons that could sterilize a planet. Against one human vessel, the outcome should have been certain. That was when the first drone attacked. It came out of the nebula like a metal wasp, too small and fast for the bioship's main weapons to target. The hegemony vessel's point defense systems tried to track it, but the drone's movements were erratic, unpredictable. It slammed into the bioship's hull and detonated its nuclear warhead. The explosion tore a massive hole in the ship's side, but Gorthal wasn't worried. Bioships could regenerate from such damage. The hull was already beginning to seal itself, new tissue growing to replace what had been destroyed. Then the second drone hit, and the third, and the fourth. Within minutes, the entire battle group was under attack from dozens of small, fast-moving targets that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The bioship's regeneration systems, designed to handle occasional battle damage, were overwhelmed by the constant assault. "Where are they coming from?" Gorthal demanded. "Unknown, War Prime. Our sensors cannot get clear readings through the interference." That was when the Indomitable revealed itself. The human Dreadnought emerged from a particularly dense gas cloud, like a metal leviathan rising from the depths. Its weapons were already charged and aimed. The first salvo from its main gun struck two bioships simultaneously, the tungsten rods punching through their hulls like bullets through paper. But Captain Chen wasn't finished. The Indomitable's missile batteries opened fire, launching a spread of antimatter warheads that tracked their targets through the nebula's interference. The bioship's defensive systems, evolved to handle energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, had no answer for weapons that annihilated matter at the atomic level. 3 more bioships died in the first minute of combat. War Prime Gorthal watched his formation disintegrate with growing horror. These humans fought like nothing he had ever encountered. Instead of meeting his forces head-on in honorable combat, they used the environment against him. Their weapons were crude but devastating, their tactics unpredictable. All ships, concentrate. Fire on the human vessel, he ordered. Ignore the drones. But it was too late for coordinated tactics. The jamming was disrupting communications between his ships, and the constant drone attacks were forcing each bio-dreadnought to fight for its own survival. When his remaining vessels tried to focus their fire on the Indomitable, the human ship simply vanished back into the nebula, leaving his weapons to fire at empty space. Captain Chen watched the battle unfold from her command chair with professional satisfaction. The hegemony commanders were skilled, but they were fighting the last war. They expected enemies to stand still and trade shots until the stronger side won. They weren't prepared for human tactical doctrine, mobility, deception, and overwhelming firepower applied at the point of maximum vulnerability. Morrison, launch the second wave of drones. Target their command ship. Aye, Captain. Launching 50 drones. Priority target the largest bioship. The Death's Whisper found itself swarmed by metal wasps, each one carrying enough nuclear firepower to level a city. Gorthal's ship was powerful, but even its regeneration systems had limits. Hull breaches appeared faster than they could be, sealed. Weapon systems went offline as their organic components were vaporized. War Prime, Vexith reported, his voice tight with panic. We've lost 7 ships. The remaining vessels are requesting permission to withdraw. Gorthal stared at the tactical display in disbelief. He had brought 12 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy to crush one human vessel. Instead, he was watching his fleet get systematically destroyed by an enemy that refused to fight by the rules. Withdraw, he said finally, the word tasting like ashes in his mouth. All ships, retreat to the rally point. The surviving bioships began to pull back from the nebula, their hulls scarred and burning. As they fled, the Indomitable emerged one final time to watch them go. Captain Chen made no attempt to pursue. She had made her point. On the bridge of the Death's Whisper, War Prime Gorthal composed his report to the Supreme Architect. It was the most difficult message he had ever written, filled with concepts that the hegemony had not needed to consider for 3,000 years. Tactical, defeat, retreat, fear. Sub-Commander, he said quietly. Prepare a priority transmission to Zephyr Prime. Yes, War Prime. Gorthal chose his words carefully. The Supreme Architect did not tolerate failure, but he needed to understand what they were facing. Supreme. Architect Velthar, this is War Prime Gorthal reporting on the engagement with the human vessel. The enemy has withdrawn deeper into the nebula after inflicting significant casualties on our forces. Recommend immediate reinforcement with the full armada. These humans, they fight like nothing we have ever encountered. They adapt, they coordinate, and they show no fear of death. He paused, then added the words that would shake the foundations of the hegemony. For the first time in 3 millennia, we have met an enemy that can match us in battle. The transmission went out across space, carrying news that would change the galaxy forever. The age of hegemony invincibility was over, though few yet realized it. In the nebula, Captain Chen stood at her observation deck and looked out at the stars. Her ship had survived its first major engagement, but she knew this was only the beginning. The hegemony would be back with more ships, better tactics, and a burning desire for revenge. But humanity had faced impossible odds before, and won. They would do so again. Martinez, she called to her communications officer. Prepare a message for The news spread through hegemony space like wildfire through dry grass. On 1,000 worlds in mining colonies and factory stations, in the depths of orbital platforms and the crowded cities of subjugated species, beings whispered the impossible. Truth. The overlords had been defeated. On the Keth homeworld, Elder Mothra stood before the same viewing screen where he had received Overlord Commander Zixara's demands just weeks before. But now his 6 hands were steady, and his large eyes burned with something that had been absent for generations. Hope. Is it true? Asked his aide, a younger Keith named Pithra, whose fur still showed the scars from working in the deep mines. The reports are consistent across 17 sectors, Mothra replied, his voice barely containing his excitement. A single ship of unknown design engaged Battle Group Omega and destroyed 7 bio-dreadnoughts. War Prime Gorthal himself confirmed the losses. Around them, other Keth leaders gathered to hear the news. For 3,000 years, their people had lived in fear of the bioships that hung above their world like metal moons. The hegemony's power had seemed absolute, unchangeable as the laws of physics. What do we do? Pithra asked. Elder Mothra was quiet for a long moment, then spoke the words that would have been treason just days before. We refuse the tribute. On the crystal world of Velnar, the crystalline beings that the hegemony used as living computers began to calculate new possibilities. For millennia, they had processed data for their overlords, their beautiful minds enslaved to serve hegemony, logistics and tactical planning. But now they turned their vast intelligence to a different problem: how to break the chains that bound them. In the depths of space, the aquatic Myrthanis closed the biogates that connected their ocean worlds to the hegemony's supply network. For the first time in 1,000 years, hegemony transports found themselves locked out of critical shipping lanes, their organic vessels unable to navigate the hyperspace currents without Myrthanis guidance. The rebellion was starting. Supreme. Architect Velthar received the reports in his crystal throne room with growing fury. His ancient face, more machine than flesh, twisted with rage as each new act of defiance was reported. 17 sectors in open revolt, his intelligence prime reported, careful to keep his voice neutral. The Keth have stopped all mining operations. The Velnari have severed their computational links to our fleet networks. The Myrthanis have closed their shipping lanes. 12 other species have declared independence. Velthar's mechanical fingers drummed against his throne. In 3,000 years of rule, he had never faced such coordinated resistance. The subject species had always been too afraid, too broken, too divided to unite against the hegemony. What had changed? The humans, he said finally. One ship, one victory, and now they think they can challenge us. Supreme Architect, perhaps we should consider negotiation, his aide suggested carefully. The humans may be reasonable. Velthar's laugh was like grinding metal. Negotiation? With primitives who dare to challenge the natural order? No. We will crush them, and we will make their destruction so complete that no other species will ever dare to dream of freedom again. He stood from his throne, his ancient body creaking with the effort. Summon the full armada, every bioship, every battle station, every weapon we have built in 3 millennia of conquest. We will show these humans why the hegemony has ruled, since before their species discovered fire. Meanwhile, in the Kepler Nebula, Captain Sarah Chen stood in her ship's engineering section, watching her teams work around the clock to prepare for what was coming. The Indomitable had taken damage in the previous battle, and while human engineering was robust, even the toughest ship had limits. Report, Chief, she said to her engineering officer, a gruff man named Patterson, who had served with her for 15 years. We've patched the hull breaches and restored primary power to all systems, Patterson replied, wiping grease from his hands. But Captain, we're down to 60% of our drone complement and we've used half our antimatter missiles. If they come at us with everything they've got. Chen nodded. She had been studying the tactical reports from across hegemony space, analyzing the rebellion that was spreading like wildfire. The subject species were brave, but they had no warships. no weapons that could stand against bio-dreadnoughts. When the hegemony's full attention turned to crushing the rebellion, it would be a slaughter, unless she could give them something else to focus on. Morrison, she called to her tactical officer, what's our long-range sensor reading on hegemony fleet movements? They're pulling ships from all across their territory, Captain. Intelligence estimates over 300 bio-dreadnoughts are converging on our position. And Captain... Morrison paused, his face grim. They're bringing the Dominion. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. The Dominion was the hegemony's ultimate weapon, a biofortress the size of a small moon. According to the intelligence reports her ship had intercepted, it had never been defeated in battle, had never even been damaged. It was Supreme Architect Velthar's personal flagship, and its weapons could destroy entire fleets. Time to arrival? 18 hours for the main fleet. The Dominion will arrive 6 hours after that. Chen was quiet for a moment, thinking. One human ship against 300 hegemony vessels and their ultimate weapon. The smart thing to do would be to retreat, to fall back to human space and wait for reinforcements. But if she did that, the rebellion would collapse. The Keth would go back to their mines. The Velnari would reconnect their computers to hegemony. Networks and the Myrthanis would reopen their shipping lanes. Billions of beings would return to slavery, their brief moment of hope crushed forever. She thought of the words carved into every human warship. We hold the line. Sometimes holding, the line meant standing alone against impossible odds. Sometimes it meant sacrificing yourself so that others could be free. Patterson, how are the modifications to the Prometheus array coming along? The chief engineer's eyes lit up with professional pride. The antimatter focusing system is online, Captain. We've never tested it at full power, but the calculations show it should be able to punch through anything the hegemony can throw at us. Chen nodded. The Prometheus array was humanity's newest weapon, a focused antimatter beam that could theoretically destroy a ship with a single shot. The problem was that it drew so much power that it would leave the Indomitable defenseless while it charged between shots. Martinez, she called to her communications officer. Prepare a message for transmission to Earth Command. Aye, Captain. Chen chose her words carefully. This might be the last message she ever sent home. To Admiral Harrison and Earth Command, have engaged the Zephyrian hegemony in combat and confirmed their hostile intentions toward humanity. The enemy possesses superior numbers but inferior tactics. Rebellion has begun among their subject species. Am preparing to engage their main fleet to buy time for colonial defense fleet deployment. Tell my family that I held the line. She paused, then added, Oh, and Admiral? Send more ships. As the message went out toward Earth, carried by quantum entanglement communicators, Chen began her final preparations. The Indomitable could not win against 300 enemy ships, but it could make them pay a price so high that they would remember humanity forever. On the bridge of the approaching Dominion, Supreme Architect Velthar studied the tactical display with cold satisfaction. His biofortress was magnificent, a living weapon 200 kilometers across, bristling with weapons that had destroyed 1,000 worlds. Around him flew the greatest fleet ever assembled, bioships that had crushed every rebellion in galactic history. One human ship, no matter how lucky or clever, could not stand against such overwhelming force. Communications, he commanded. Open a channel to the human vessel. The transmission crossed the void between fleets, carrying the voice of a being who had ruled a galaxy for 3 millennia. Human Captain Sarah Chen, I am Supreme Architect Velthar of the Zephyrian hegemony. You have committed acts of war against our sovereign territory and incited rebellion among our subject species. Surrender immediately, and I will grant you and your crew the honor of quick deaths. Chen's response came back within minutes, her voice calm and unafraid. Supreme Architect Velthar, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Indomitable. Your empire is built on oppression and slavery. Humanity does not negotiate with tyrants. If you want our surrender, come and take it. Velthar's ancient features twisted with rage. So be it. You will die knowing that your defiance has accomplished nothing. The rebellion will be crushed. Your world will burn, and your species will serve as a lesson to any who dare challenge the hegemony's will. We'll see about that, Chen replied, and cut the transmission. In the depths of space, two fleets prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of a galaxy. On one side, the accumulated might of 3,000 years of conquest. On the other, a single human ship and the courage of those who refused to kneel. The final confrontation was about to begin. Across the rebellious worlds, beings looked up at the stars and whispered prayers to whatever gods they still remembered. They knew that somewhere in the darkness, their fate was being decided by strangers who had chosen to fight for their freedom. On the Keth homeworld, Elder Mothra stood before his people and spoke words that had not been spoken in a though. The Battle of the Void began at 800 hours, ship time, when the hegemony armada dropped out of hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts. 300 bioships stretched across thousands of kilometers, their hulls pulsing with organic light. At their center, the Dominion hung in space like a cancerous moon, its surface covered with weapon pods that could sterilize worlds. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching her tactical displays with the calm of someone who had already accepted death. Her ship was alone, 15 kilometers of human engineering facing the accumulated might of a galactic empire. All hands. She spoke into the ship's communication system, her voice reaching 8,000 human beings who had followed her across the galaxy. This is the captain. Today we face impossible odds. Today we stand alone against an empire that has enslaved entire species for 3,000 years. But we are not afraid. She paused, looking out at the stars through the bridge viewport. We are humanity. We have faced extinction before and survived. We have stood against the darkness and held the line. Today we do so again, not for glory, not for conquest, but for the simple idea that all beings deserve to be free. Hold the line, make them pay, and remember that Earth is watching. The first shots came from the hegemony's outer ring, bioplasma beams that could melt mountains. The Indomitable's shields flared and held, but Chen knew they couldn't absorb that kind of punishment for long. Morrison, return fire. Show them what human weapons can do. The Dreadnought's main guns spoke with the voice of thunder, launching tungsten rods at 15% of light speed. 3 bioships died in the opening salvo, their hulls vaporized by the kinetic impact. But 3 ships out of 300 was barely a scratch. Captain, Morrison reported, enemy formation is tightening, they're trying to surround us. Chen nodded. It was the classic hegemony tactic: surround, overwhelm, destroy. But she had one advantage they didn't expect. The Indomitable wasn't alone. Open. Quantum fold gates, she ordered. Authorization code Independence Day. Space around the Indomitable began to ripple and tear as massive gates opened in the fabric of reality. Through them came the rest of the human colonial defense fleet. 50 dreadnoughts, each one incorporating the lessons learned from humanity's first battles with the hegemony. Admiral Martinez, Chen's former communications officer who had been promoted after the first engagement, appeared on the main screen from the bridge of the UES Defiance. "Sorry we're late, Captain," she said with a grim smile. Traffic was murder. Supreme Architect Velthar watched the human fleet emerge from fold space with something approaching shock. Intelligence had suggested the humans possessed only one major warship. Instead, he faced 51 dreadnoughts, their hulls bristling with weapons he was only beginning to understand. "All ships, attack formation Velmar," he commanded. "Concentrate fire on their command vessel." The hegemony fleet moved with the coordination of 3 millennia of conquest. Bioships flowing into attack positions like predators surrounding wounded prey. But as they closed the distance, the human fleet revealed its tactical doctrine. Instead of meeting the hegemony head-on, the human ships scattered into smaller groups, each one supporting the others with overlapping fields of fire. Their point: defense systems created walls of interceptor fire that destroyed incoming bioplasma beams. Their electronic warfare suites jammed hegemony communications, breaking up the perfect coordination that had served the Empire for so long. And then Captain Chen unveiled humanity's ultimate weapon. "All ships, "Prepare Prometheus Array," she broadcast, on the fleet command frequency. "Target the enemy flagship." Across 51 human dreadnoughts, massive antimatter focusing arrays began to charge. The energy requirements were enormous, forcing each ship to divert power from shields and weapons. For 60 seconds, they would be vulnerable to enemy fire, but 60 seconds was all they needed. The combined Prometheus array fired as one, 51, beams of focused antimatter converging on the Dominion. The biofortress's shields, designed to stop conventional weapons, simply vanished when they met matter's opposite. The beams carved through the hegemony's ultimate weapon like swords through silk, vaporizing everything they touched. Supreme Architect. Velthar had just enough time to realize that his 3,000-year reign was over before the bridge of the Dominion ceased to exist. The explosion of the biofortress lit up half the star system, a new sun born from humanity's refusal to kneel. When the light faded, the greatest weapon in the hegemony's arsenal was gone, taking their supreme architect with it. But the battle was far from over. The remaining hegemony ships, driven by rage and desperation, threw themselves at the human fleet in a final furious assault. Bioships rammed human dreadnoughts, accepting mutual destruction rather than accept defeat. Captain Chen watched the UES Valiant die as 3 biocruisers crashed into its hull, their combined mass tearing the human ship apart. The UES Courage lasted 30 seconds longer before enemy fire overwhelmed its shields and turned its bridge into an expanding cloud of debris. "Captain," Morrison reported, his voice tight with strain, "we're losing ships faster than we can destroy theirs. At this rate." Chen knew what he meant. Humanity had superior tactics and weapons, but the hegemony still had numbers. Even with the Dominion gone, they still fielded over 200 bioships against 47 remaining human vessels. That was when the rebellion struck. On the Keth homeworld, mining ships that had been converted into improvised weapons platforms launched themselves at the hegemony garrison. They were crude vessels with civilian engines and mining lasers, but they were crewed by beings who had finally remembered what freedom felt like. On Velnar, the crystalline beings used their vast computational abilities to crash every hegemony computer system within 100 light-years. Supply networks collapsed, communication arrays went silent, and reserve fleets found themselves cut off from central command. In the ocean worlds of the Myrthanis, the aquatic beings opened hyperspace, gates directly into the path of fleeing hegemony vessels. Bioships designed for normal space found themselves pulled into the crushing depths of hyperspace, their organic hulls collapsing under pressures they were never meant to withstand. Across 17 sectors, the oppressed rose up against their oppressors. They had no warships, no advanced weapons, but they had something the hegemony had forgotten: the desperate courage of those who fight for their freedom. The tide of battle shifted. Hegemony ships found their supply lines cut, their communication networks jammed, their retreat routes blocked by sabotaged hyperspace gates. What had been a coordinated fleet became a collection of isolated vessels, each fighting for its own survival. Captain Chen seized the moment. All ships, general advance, break their formation and scatter their forces. The human fleet charged forward, their weapons blazing. Bioships that had terrorized a galaxy for 3,000 years died in the cold vacuum of space, their hulls split open by human fire. In the end, fewer than 30 hegemony vessels escaped the battle, fleeing toward the galactic rim with their hulls scarred and their spirits broken. Behind them, they left the wreckage of an empire and the birth of a new age. Captain Chen stood in what remained of the Indomitable's bridge, her ship battered but victorious. Around her, the surviving human fleet began rescue operations, searching the debris field for survivors from both sides. "Martinez," she said to her old friend, now Admiral Martinez, "open a channel to all frequencies. Let every being in the galaxy hear this." The transmission went out across space, carried by quantum communicators and hyperspace beacons, reaching every world, every station, every ship in the galaxy. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Indomitable. The Supreme Architect is dead. The hegemony armada is broken. The age of oppression is over. To all species, all worlds, all beings who have lived in fear, you are free. On 1,000 worlds, beings looked up at the stars and wept. For the first time in 3 millennia, they could dream of tomorrow without fear. 6 months later, Admiral Martinez stood on the observation deck of the new Galactic Council station, watching representatives from dozens of species work together to build something the galaxy had never seen before, a government based on cooperation rather than conquest. The Keth had named their first free generation's children after Captain Chen. The Velnari composed crystalline symphonies about human courage. The Myrthanis declared the Day of Liberation a holy festival, to be celebrated in their deepest ocean temples for all time. But perhaps the most important change was in the exploration ships that now launched from human space stations, carrying a message that would echo across the universe. We are humanity. We stand with those who fight for freedom, and we hold the line. The galaxy was free, but the universe was vast. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, other empires waited, other tyrants ruled. But they would learn, as the hegemony had, learned that some things were worth fighting for, and humanity would be there, standing with the oppressed, holding the line against the dark. The age of liberation had begun,